Yes, good afternoon, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here. My name is Vinicius Pinheiro. I'm the ILO Special Representative to the UN and head of the ILO office in New York. And we shall continue with the informal interactive multi-stakeholder hearing in support of the preparatory process towards the high-level plenary meeting to review the global plan of action to combat trafficking persons. So this third panel is very important because it connects trafficking persons and the Sustainable Development Agenda. As you know, trafficking, human trafficking is well reflected in the SDGs. The entire agenda contains 3 targets on ending human trafficking under SDG 5, which is more connected to women and girls, on SDG 8 that associates trafficking with modern slavery and forced labor, and SDG 16 on peace, justice, and strong institutions that refers to traffic of children. So it makes a lot of sense to actually connect the global plan of action to combat trafficking of persons with the implementation of the 2030 agenda, which is a broader agenda for development that should include actually or connect with the different streams in different areas. In this regard, it's also important to reaffirm the need of the normative framework that includes, of course, as you know, the UN Convention Against Transnational Organized Crime and the Protocol to Prevent, Suppress, and Punish Trafficking in Persons, especially women and children, as well as the ratification of the ILO Protocol of 2014 to the Forced Labor Convention. It's equally important to support the formation of global partnerships to ensure the implementation of the 2030 Agenda, including partnerships that are associated with specific targets. And here I'd like to refer to the Alliance 8.7 to end all forms of forced labor, human traffic, and modern slavery, as well as the Global Partnership to End Violence Against Children. Engagement with business is fundamental through the adoption of codes of conduct and fair recruitment practices. And on that note, I would like to invite these distinguished panelists to speak. I mean, I will be giving 5 minutes to conclude your remarks, and after we will invite the audience to intervene as well in an interactive dialogue, 3 minutes to each one of the speakers. So it's my pleasure to invite His Excellency Alexis Bittencourt-Yao. He's the Minister of Public Security of Panama and Vice Chair of the United Nations Voluntary Trust Fund for Victims of Trafficking in Persons, especially women and children. So, Minister, usted tiene la palabra, por favor.
Thank you. Good afternoon. I would like to give my speech in Spanish. Okay. En nombre del pueblo.
On behalf of the people and government of the Republic of Panama, and our President, His Excellency Juan Carlos Varela, our President, I'm pleased to be here in such a distinguished company here in order to participate in this interactive multi-stakeholder hearing in support of the preparatory process towards the high-level plenary meeting to review the global plan of action to combat trafficking in persons. In particular, I wish to thank the representatives of the United Nations Secretariat and to thank the moderators, the panelists, and officials responsible for steering this event. I thank them for their contributions in helping us to address this very complex and important theme in the context of the 2030 Sustainable Development Agenda. For President Juan Carlos Varela and his administration, prevention and combating the trafficking in persons is a priority as part of our citizen security strategy. This is focused on guaranteeing human rights and protecting a series of services through our platform in Panama. This addresses organized crime so that this is not used for illicit activities. In light of this great responsibility of the state of Panama and in line with our global plan of action in order to combat trafficking in persons adopted in 2010, over the past 30 months of managing this, we have been able to dismantle 50 networks of trafficking of persons, prosecuted dozens of traffickers, and rescued hundreds of victims of this scourge. These results are the result of a set of specific actions to prevent the trafficking and prosecute traffickers and ensure protection for victims, and to create partnerships in order to mobilize resources for cooperation. The first thing that we did was to ensure the legal and technical institutional aspects of this. We have a National Commission on Trafficking, which is under the Ministry of Security in Panama. In addition, we adopted a law 79 of 2011 addressing the trafficking in persons and other related activities. This was pending. And we have a plan in place for prevention, and I can announce here that in order to strengthen national prevention efforts, we, by executive decree, have declared September as an anti-trafficking month in Panama. We have institutionalized the organization of educational activities and national events. This is accompanied by radio and television adverts in order to raise awareness of the population and to promote participation and raise awareness also of public servers and civil society on prevention and combating of trafficking. In addition, we have activated official bank accounts earmarked with funds to address trafficking in persons and of migrants. This has enabled us to mobilize national and international resources to provide comprehensive care to victims of these crimes. In order to ensure protection and provide comprehensive care to victims, we have signed an agreement together with the United Nations Office on Drugs and Crime in an amount of $3.5 million. And this is to establish the first shelter for victims of trafficking in our region. This will meet the highest international standards in this respect. And this is in partnership with UNODC. As regards complaints and prosecution, with the view to encouraging the registration of complaints, we have set up a hotline which is available 24/7 and enables citizens to have contact directly. And in order to enhance the effective prosecutions and litigation in cases of trafficking in our country, we have strengthened interagency coordination between our National Migration Service, National Police, and the Public Ministry in order to identify and prosecute organizations and persons involved in trafficking. In this respect, I wish to underscore successful actions and cases at the national and regional levels. And this is through the exchange of information. As regards our participation, high-level participation, and the Trafficking Fund, from the start of this year, we are grateful to have been selected as pro-tempore president of the regional coalition of Central American countries in dealing with trafficking in persons. And at the end of May, we also had the great honor to receive the vice chair of the Executive Board of the United Nations Trust Fund for Victims of Trafficking. This fund, the United Nations Fund, enables funding specific projects throughout the world through governments and NGOs, Since 2012, the fund has funded 34 projects in 30 countries. Also, the UN Trust Fund for Victims of Trafficking currently has $2.6 million in contributions. And this is an amount that we must ensure. We must guarantee funds to this fund. Our societies must build up this fund. Currently, organized crime networks are seeking profit throughout the world. Today, thanks to the great level of official information we understand that women and girls are the most vulnerable to trafficking in persons and are the majority of the more than 12 million victims of this crime throughout the world. We know that trafficking of persons takes on different modalities: sexual exploitation, labor exploitation, trafficking in organs, and there are various security aspects involved. In this respect, our government provides to the international community our lessons learned. And we do so humbly, recognizing that although many challenges remain before us to eradicate this scourge and combat transnational crime, if we work together, the international community can tackle this scourge. And championing fundamental rights and international and human dignity. Thank you very much.
Bueno, muchísimas gracias
Thank you very much, sir.
for sharing with us your experience. I think there's one word that you said that that summarizes what has been discussed here, which is concrete action. So you're a man of concrete actions. After spending 23 years in the national police, you really bring to the table responses and concrete actions to address the issues. Now it's my pleasure to invite Mrs. Nancy River. She's the president and founder of the Airline Ambassadors International, AAI, and she has an amazing story as well. She was hired as a flight attendant for American Airlines in 1996, and then she created this incredible foundation to provide vulnerable children and to harness the airline travel industry power to make a difference. She was honored with the Human Rights Hero Award by the Foundation for Slavery-Free World in 2019. And so, Nancy, please, you have the floor.
Okay. We have the PowerPoint up? So I'm so pleased. Thank you so much for inviting me to share about the role of the air transport industry in the fight against human trafficking and in support of the global plan of action. Basically, I founded Airline Ambassadors in 1996 for airline personnel like myself to help children in need, and we're still the only charity representing the overall airline industry. We began with airline personnel, but we expanded to over 10,000 members from all backgrounds traveling to make a difference. We're an ECOSOC NGO with the United Nations. We measure our success every year on the basis of the UN goals. So we support the SDGs. Our first programs, we escort children that need medical care to the United States for donated care. We moved 3,000 children for medical care. We've provided $60 million worth of aid to 500,000 children in 62 countries around the world through our humanitarian program. Every month, we travel to different countries and help children, and we saw children in need. But we didn't know anything about the issue of human trafficking until 2009, when we saved a little girl in the picture with the red marks on her body in Cambodia. She was trying to draw clothes on her own body. And we learned then about the dark reality of human trafficking and that victims were being moved many times by airplane. On our very next mission, the following month, in the Dominican Republic, we talked about the issue, and our small team amazingly correctly identified trafficking on 4 different airlines. Our first tip led to the bust of a pornography ring in Boston, saving 86 children. As we researched, we realized that all 117 nations had signed the Palermo Protocol in 2000, and nothing had been done. Countries need to enforce the Palermo Protocol. And that trafficking is linked to far more than just humans. It's the same players that are behind this that are in drug trafficking, in smuggling, money laundering, and terrorism. We knew that the airline travel industry could provide vital information to detect and discern human trafficking on airlines with trained personnel. And it's even happening in airports. This report came in from Gatwick, where young girls were being brought out from Eastern Europe. They were being actually auctioned off in the arrivals hall in Gatwick a few years ago. We know that traffickers use all forms of transportation, but often the speed and convenience of commercial air travel. I knew as a flight attendant that the infrastructure is in place globally to train flight crew, and that a simple procedure could be added to our security training at all airlines that would actually save lives, and that could be done at virtually no cost. The infrastructure is already in place. So I went to Congressman Smith in the United States, who was the author of the first legislation in the U.S. for help. We reached out to airlines and embassies in 2010. There was some movement, but the airlines are afraid of this issue in general. They're afraid to associate their brand with something they see as negative, even though the protection of women and children is not negative. So we took it upon ourselves to develop the first industry-specific campaign on human trafficking awareness, training sections. And it coordinates in the United States with the Blue Lightning Protocol under the United States laws. We've implemented that training now 57 times at airports across the United States in the world, 8 countries internationally, and we just got back from Jamaica last week with support of the U.S. Embassy. We're doing this as a public service. Basically, we teach flight crew to be aware of the indicators of human trafficking and use their time on the airplane to get information in a natural way. And if they see indicators of trafficking, which we have at least 15 or 16 times that I know of where we've been correct, they alert the pilot. The pilot radios ahead and coordinates with law enforcement on the ground. We had that same case last week when we went to Jamaica. There was a trafficking case on our airplane. And so the problem is the pilots aren't always trained. In this case, we had to push the pilots to call ahead, and luckily they did. The training of one frontline personnel can result in the effective scanning of 2.4 million passengers, saving lives. This simple solution should be included as part of the global plan of action from all countries. Our work in the United States to influence national legislation. Last July, the FAA Reauthorization Act was passed, requiring flight training for flight attendants. And you might have seen the stories about Shalia Frederick, the girl on the bottom there, who saved a young girl by finding a sticky note in the bathroom of the airplane. That's only one of the many success stories we have. But here are the deficiencies in the global system that we need to correct. Most airlines in the world do not train their staff. In the United States, they're starting to do this, but online trainings are not effective. And data is not shared. Little coordination among national hotlines. Agencies could utilize our Tip Line app, which is free on Google or iTunes, and more airports and countries can adopt the Blue Heart campaign, as Jamaica just did. The private sector is critical. We want to honor the efforts of Air France and Copa Airlines in utilizing their airplanes with the Blue Heart symbol and showing in-flight videos, utilizing in-flight media. Delta and JetBlue for taking a leadership approach to training staff and a commitment to this issue, adopting human trafficking policies, and American Airlines for hiring human trafficking survivors. We want to expand all of these things. And partnership is critical. The 4 Ps, the private sector must be further engaged to work with government, NGOs, and the whole effort on human trafficking for effective coordination. And if not, this could be the last trace of an abducted child. Thank you for including this issue and encouraging your airlines in every country to jump on board this issue. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mrs. River. So this is another concrete example, a simple and low-cost solution that can have huge impacts in terms of saving lives. On this topic, I would just like to announce that the Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights and International Civil Aviation Organization has jointly developed a guidance tool to assist cabin crews in identifying victims of trafficking. And this tool will be launched in Geneva during the Human Rights Council in March 2018. So now it's my pleasure to invite another founder, another president of a major institution, which is Mrs. Ruchira Gupta. She's a feminist campaigner, and she's a NYU visiting professor. And she also founded an anti-sex trafficking organization that's called Apne, Women Worldwide. So we are curious to listen to your experience and lessons learned from your experience. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Up Women Worldwide, which works in India among 20,000 girls and women who are trapped in prostitution. And we have been organizing for the last 15 years so that we can prevent the trafficking of the children of the prostituted women and create reintegration and rehabilitation opportunities for those who are victims and survivors of sex trafficking. At the same time, just like my co-panelist from Panama, we have been going after sex trafficking rings in India and put 66 traffickers in jail because these are the people who prey upon the vulnerabilities of these little girls who are poor, who are female. In India, they are low caste, and all of them are teenagers between the ages of 9 and 13. Typically, a trafficker goes into a village or a slum in India and either seduces, tricks, forces, or even tells the parents that he will put the daughter into prostitution, but at least she will have 2 meals and a bed. And to the horror of these little girls, they are suddenly taken away from their families of love and compassion into these communities where they are raped by 8 or 10 men every night. This morning you heard an American survivor, T, who spoke about the horrors of the sexual exploitation that she has faced in America. It's no different in India. For 5 or 6 years, these girls are used repeatedly, and finally, when they are of no commercial value, they are thrown out to die on the sidewalks, disease-ridden, maybe with 2 or 3 children. I call these girls the last girls. And today's topic is how can we combat trafficking in persons in the context of the 2030 Sustainable Development Goals. There are 17 Sustainable Development Goals. And to achieve success in any of those goals, we need to combat sex trafficking. And to combat sex trafficking, we need to reach that 13-year-old in a brothel or that little girl in a slum or in a village who is completely impoverished or disenfranchised in India, or born to a black family in America or to a Native American family in Canada, a minority ethnicity in Latin America or Europe. She could be a refugee. And all these girls are marked by their vulnerability because there's enough of a demand for traffic persons, especially for the purposes of sexual exploitation, prostitution as we call it, and traffickers know there's a profit, so they go around looking for such girls who are the poorest of the poor. So to achieve the Sustainable Development Goals, we have to create systems to reach that girl. And first aid and skimming the top of the bottom will not do. So we cannot simply say that we have to reach the lowest hanging fruit and therefore reach the second last girl or the third last girl, or even try for quick fix solutions saying that, okay, she's already in prostitution, so why don't we just mitigate her circumstances by giving her condoms? So at least she will not get AIDS. But her basic needs are food, clothing, shelter, education, and protection from the person raping her before she needs a condom. And so we have to now go backwards to see exactly what that last girl needs to make the Sustainable Development Goals succeed and actually be sustainable. There are 3 goals which are extremely important in this context. There is 5.2, which deals with violence against women, and prostitution, as all of you know and have heard today from so many people, is a form of violence against women. It is gender-based. The majority of those trafficked are girls and women, and the majority of those trafficked are trafficked for sexual exploitation. So we have to see how we can address the Sustainable Development Goal or the target of 5.2 in the context of sex trafficking. The other one, of course, is 8.7, and the third one is 16.2, which is also asking us as a target to collect data which is gender sensitive. How do we collect data about who is trafficked? And again, if we start looking at the data, we will see that the majority are women and girls, and also they are the most vulnerable. Very often there have been attempts, and many of you know it, that is it possible to collapse sex trafficking and prostitution into the larger idea or framework of forced labor? And we cannot do that because forced labor is very different from sexual exploitation. Sexual exploitation is not work. And the moment we accept sexual exploitation as work, we will dilute the labor struggles that we have achieved, the successes of the labor struggles that we have achieved in all these decades. And my moderator is from ILO, and he knows how hard it is to even hold on to the things that we want as part of labor movements, which is minimum wages, dignity, good working conditions, and old age pension. In prostitution, we cannot achieve any of those things. There is no such thing as minimum wages. In fact, you earn the most on the first day in the job, and then steadily the income goes down. There can be no such regulation for body penetration, so we might be able to legislate things around working conditions in other ways, but we cannot legislate away the body invasion that prostitution inherently has. The third thing that labor struggles aspire for is old age pension. Here the old age pension is disease and death, but because of the repeated body invasion, we find that women end up with diseases. Some people use condoms, some don't. A girl cannot negotiate who her customer is. And of course, dignity. Labor struggles have been able to legislate that a man does not have to crawl into a mine anymore. And this little girl or this young woman standing in a red light district or a street corner, a dark street corner, has to negotiate the value of her body all the time. And so therefore, we have to stick to the UN protocol to end trafficking in persons, especially women and children, in which it is very clearly stated that vulnerability must be addressed, the demand must be addressed, and by demand I mean both the customers who buy sex and the traffickers who buy and sell girls and recruit them, transport them, and transfer them. And we of course have to see how we can make sex trafficking, the combating of sex trafficking, an indicator in every single Sustainable Development Goal. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mrs. Gupta, in particular for highlighting the differences between forced labor and sexual exploitation. I know there are a lot of controversies around this discussion, but I would now like to open the floor for interactive discussion and invite participants to make comments and pose questions regarding the presentations. And please, interventions should not exceed 3 minutes. Introduce yourself.
Okay.
Thank you so much.
My name is Sally Cater. I represent an organization for peace here at the UN, International Federation for Peace and Sustainable Development. And we have been working with the issue of human trafficking since 2004, right here at the UN. We've invited several victims over the years, including ICE, Interpol, all government officials. And the problem does not seem to go away. We have been trying to minimize it, but it doesn't seem to happen. It's getting bigger and worse. We do a lot of work with immigrants and refugees and so on. So last year we had gone to the Zaatari camp that is in Jordan that hosts about 100,000 refugees, Syrian refugees. And we took it upon ourselves to draft and write and print and assimilate programs about what to watch for when these predators come. They promise them jobs, they promise them education, they promise them marriage, they promise them all kinds of things. And we all know it is not true. And this is where the predators first hit, is disaster areas, and of course refugee camps and so on. So we did this and we taught them what to say and how to find these people and what language they should look for and how to report it. But it's not enough. We need a lot of awareness. We educate and we have people educating each other and so on. We printed these pamphlets and so on in several languages. And we did it, of course, in Arabic and English. We had women to teach. We had volunteers going there into the camps and teaching them. But what can we do, all of us together, to make sure that these things are minimized, if not eliminated? We have laws, but we need governments to implement. We need people to go to jail. We need people, we have to have some sort of a recourse where we can go and complain and make an example of these people. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Madam. Now I have number 2558. I don't know what you have the floor, Madam. Please introduce yourself.
Hi there. My name is Dr. Heidi Hofinger, and I'm here on behalf of Kingston University in London, where I'm a postdoctoral researcher working on a large international study funded by the European Research Council that's looking at the social and legal interventions that respond to human trafficking and migration in 4 countries, which are the United States, Australia, New Zealand, and France. Today, I'd like to talk briefly about France, which has recently criminalized clients in an end-demand-like policy. Our data has revealed the negative impact the policy is having on the lives of the people in the sex trades who are there either by choice, circumstance, or coercion. The end-demand style policy has led to increased impoverishment, stress, isolation, and deterioration of working conditions and income of people in the sex trades. They're having to negotiate faster and go to more remote areas. Some people in the sex trades describe sex without condoms and taking more risks in general, as well as accepting clients that they have previously refused. In this way, the policies are ultimately giving more power to clients who have better bargaining power to impose what they want. The increase in law enforcement actions aimed at buyers has also inevitably resulted in increased criminalization of those involved in the sex trades. For example, people involved in the sex trades still face risk of arrest on procurement charges, for undeclared work, or due to local public orders. In a survey of 500 people involved in the sex trades that was conducted in France in 2015, 98% of those involved working in various sectors were against the criminalization of clients. Despite this feedback from the community, the law was implemented, and as anticipated, it has so far negatively impacted people involved in the sex trades and made them more vulnerable to violence and trafficking rather than less. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your comment. I'd love to hear the reaction of Minister Alexis Betancourt about that intervention, but let's wait a little bit. I would now like to invite Belarus on behalf of the group of Friends United Against Human Trafficking.
Mr. Chair, thank you very much for giving me the floor. I'm afraid this statement is on our national behalf. First of all, I would like to extend appreciation to the distinguished panelists for their very interesting and informative presentations. We know that trafficking in persons is reflected in the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development and 3 targets, 5.2, 8.7, and 16.2. So it certainly makes much sense to reflect them in the political declaration. Very recently, on May 26th, the Vienna-based UN Commission on Crime Prevention adopted a resolution implementation of the United Nations Global Plan of Action to combat trafficking in persons. The resolution was sponsored by Belarus, and I had the honor of chairing informal negotiations on the draft. Let me first say that the draft was met with enormous interest, as up to 100 delegations attended 4-day-long informals. The delegations wanted to learn from the New York-based appraisal process and to contribute to it. We think with the adoption of this resolution, Vienna sent a very clear signal of support to New York. The negotiations featured a very extensive and lively debate on SDGs and human trafficking. Our point of departure was a reference to one relevant paragraph from GA Resolution 70/179, which addressed only one human trafficking-related target, 8.7. The delegations were of the view that it was not enough, so we aimed for more and we succeeded. The resolution contains 3 paragraphs in the preamble part devoted to the theme of SDGs and human trafficking. Specifically, the resolution lists the 3 targets and provides very specific texts on their content. What is more, the resolution links the 3 paragraphs to the implementation of the global plan. Importantly, 20 member states representing different parts of the world co-sponsor the document. And the list of co-sponsors was indeed unique. It includes 5 countries of the group of Friends United Against Human Trafficking: Russia, Qatar, Venezuela, Eritrea, and Ecuador, as well as a number of developed countries such as the United States, the United Kingdom, Japan, and Greece. So we would like to humbly advise the delegations to take a close look at the resolution. We think it may be helpful in our appraisal process. And we also hope that the same high level of support and spirit of goodwill and constructiveness to the topic of the global plan, future political declaration, and forthcoming high-level event of the appraisal demonstrated recently in Vienna will be shown in New York. We hope we can deliver as one. Last but not least, the implementation of SDGs on human trafficking issues requires a comprehensive approach, which should harness all stakeholders. In this context, the role of the Interagency Coordination Group Against Trafficking in Persons as the crucial element in the global fight against human trafficking is very important. In this regard, we invite ICAT with UNODC as the coordinator of its work on SDGs implementation, as well as in close connection with the member states on this matter. Thank you very much.
I thank you, the representative of Belarus, who spoke on behalf of his own country. I would now like to invite the distinguished representative of the United Kingdom.
Thank you. Thank you, moderator. And also thank you to all the speakers who have taken the time to come here today and speak to us. I really appreciate that, and it's actually been personally very useful. And I really urge my colleagues to take into account what we've heard today. I think, as we've heard, there are very clear linkages to the 2030 Agenda, Target 5.2, 8.7, 16.2, But there are also targets, as well as we heard, where there's a less direct but an important connection. So target 16.10, for example, on human rights, or target 10.2 on inclusion. And on the issue of inclusion, it also struck me that the 2030 Agenda commits us to leave no one behind. And listening today really made me realize that some of the most marginalized, hidden, and left behind people are the victims of trafficking. And we really have a responsibility to give them a special focus. There's a further linkage, which is with partnerships, and we've heard that today. And I think we have to think about how the Global Plan of Action can be one of the partnerships that helps deliver the 2030 Agenda and is actually part of the means of implementation. But we should also consider other multi-stakeholder efforts. So, for example, Alliance 8.7 has been met, and how these all come together. Finally, there's a lesson that we can borrow from the 2030 Agenda, which states very clearly that the goals and targets are indivisible. And I think member states made a very clear message that we can't achieve the 2030 Agenda through a siloed approach. And we know that this is true for development more broadly. But again, listening here today from all the variety of interventions from lots of different people, we can't win the battle against trafficking through a siloed approach either. So as we review the global plan, I think we should start to ask how it links coherently with all the work the UN does or facilitates on trafficking. And just a few examples of these, and some of these are new developments. We have the Human Rights Council and the role of special rapporteurs. We have the work of the Security Council, who just in December passed a resolution on trafficking and armed conflict. We have discussions on migration that are ongoing. We have initiatives on forced labor, which, as we've heard from India and in other contexts, have a very clear relevance to this. And I think my point is that we just need to start discussing how everything the UN does on trafficking across all three of its pillars really comes together to meet the aspirations and the goals that our leaders agreed in September 2015 under the 2030 Agenda. Thank you.
Thank you very much, in particular for highlighting the cross-cutting nature of the issue, not only speaking to the three targets, but also to the entire agenda, and also that we need to tackle this through a cross-cutting approach, avoid silos, and also connecting with the different initiatives and discussions. I would now like to invite the distinguished representative of Costa Rica.
Microphone for the speaker, please. In the context of 8.7, this is the commitment of member states to adopt immediate and effective measures to tackle forced labor and to put an end to all forms of modern slavery and trafficking. We should note that the progress made towards other SDGs are key to combat this global scourge, which is undeniably interlinked. Poverty, violence against women, gender equity and women's empowerment, economic development, justice, and the need for strong institutions. All of these elements are essential for eliminating the trafficking in persons. In line with the 2030 Agenda, migration should also be addressed through development policies. Not all trafficked persons are migrants. However, orderly, regular migration is key. It should be addressed to guarantee human rights and labor rights in countries. Costa Rica, owing to its geographical location, is a country of destination, transit, and origin of migrants. 147 victims from our country and outside have been victims of this form of slavery. Since 2003, we've had a law on trafficking of persons and have established a coalition to address the trafficking of migrants and persons. This is an interinstitutional group to combat trafficking in persons in a comprehensive and coordinated way. We criminalize trafficking under 172 of our criminal code, and a special prosecutor's office to investigate alleged perpetrators. In our country, addressing trafficking should This focuses on all those involved in eradicating this problem. We have programs to raise awareness of all officials and institutions countering this scourge, from police offices through persons receiving complaints and medical teams and judges of cases. Efforts also extend to civil society and the private sector to cooperate to ensure prevention and countering trafficking in persons. We should also note that the common forms of trafficking continues to be sexual exploitation. According to the UNODC, all persons are potential victims of trafficking. However, most victims are women and girls. Therefore, we must undertake economic and other measures to tackle this through measures for empowerment. We hope that today in this interactive debate, this can serve to prepare ensuring progress is made in the plan and to ensure a format for debate and involve all of society to leave no one behind when it comes to trafficking in persons. Thank you.
Bueno, muchas gracias. Thank you so much, in particular, for highlighting the importance of education and awareness raising. I would now like to invite the distinguished representative of the Philippines.
Thank you to the speakers for their insights. Special thanks to Nancy Rivard for her revelations and her work to stop sex trafficking in the air. Everything, including the kitchen sink, has been thrown at terrorism. Why have the same efforts not been exerted, the same relentless, searching, and ruthless measures taken, especially on the internet, to combat sex trafficking of women and girls who undergo the ultimate terrorism of sex slavery? Worse than sudden death by terrorism is prolonged degradation by sexual trafficking. The use of the human person as a thing to be used and reused and disposed of like tissue paper. Worse than sudden death is the protracted distortion of the most intimate of loving acts through sexual abuse for raw male gratification. The reason is that terrorism targets people at large. That is not true of sex trafficking. More than the huge number of women and girls subjected to it are the greater numbers of men around the world who relish it and want it to continue. Hence the ambivalence, not to say the comparative feebleness, of global efforts to stop sex trafficking. In 1994, the Philippines tabled a resolution against trafficking in women and girls. It recognizes the importance of global partnership in this endeavor, because the victims come from all over the world and because variety is the spice of male sexual vice. Governments must ensure a coherence between laws on migration and measures against the abuse of migrants to which they pay lip service, so the law is not used to allow abuse as in the case of immigration rules. There is a danger in subsuming the problem of sexual slavery spanning the globe to the smaller issue of forced labor in parts of it. As Ruchira Gupta observed yesterday, prostitution is not a job. A few years ago, the actor Ashton Kutcher said here at the UN that the problem with calling prostitution the oldest profession is that he could not imagine any girl telling her parents proudly, "One day I want to make a living lying on my back as a prostitute." Worse yet, as a sex slave living in greater fear for her life than of its repeated degradation. Thank you.
I thank the distinguished representative of the Philippines, and I would now like to invite a representative from the civil society, the number 2553, please.
Thank you very much. My name is Eric Piasa from Ghana, and I work for Executive Director for Right to be Free, as a consultant for migration and trafficking. My question, I have one question that I want to make, contribution that I want to make, that when you go back to most of the developing countries, especially Africa, we have a lot of issues on the issue of government committing to stop trafficking. Most of our countries are the first to ratify most of these conventions. But the challenge is that for them to commit funds for its implementation becomes an issue. So if you want to reduce trafficking or end trafficking by the year 2030, I don't know how it's going to happen in some of these developing countries, right in Africa, where most governments have different needs and priorities. So they find it so difficult to commit funding supporting the issue. What can we do to change that? Thank you.
Thank you so much, Eric, for highlighting this important issue, funding and financing, more specifically. I would now like to invite a representative of the civil society, number 2525. Please.
Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for the opportunity to speak today. I'm Mariana Vanin. I'm with the Coalition Against Trafficking in Women. Combating the scourge of human trafficking is so urgent that, as we heard multiple times before today, 3 of the 17 Sustainable Development Goals dedicate specific targets, 5.2, 8.7, and 16.2, to human trafficking in specific and distinct scopes. Achieving gender equality requires investing in the eradication of all forms of violence and discrimination against women and girls globally, including trafficking. In light of this, a multi-stakeholder group of national and international human rights advocates, women's rights organizations, organizations providing services to and advocacy on behalf of victims of trafficking and gender-based violence, survivors of trafficking and the exploitation of prostitution, survivor-led organizations and networks, faith-based and secular organizations, as well as concerned individuals around the world, will soon launch the 5.2 Global Partnership to assist the UN and its agencies to distinguish sex trafficking, sexual exploitation, and the exploitation of prostitution of others from other forms of exploitation in trafficking, including forced labor, child trafficking, slavery, or practices similar to slavery, servitude, or the removal of organs pursuant to the Palermo Protocol. It will also work to encourage member states to develop national plans of action that include the contributions of survivor leaders as key stakeholders, comprehensive services for victims, and preventative measures. The 5.2 Global Partnership will also advocate for the prosecution of perpetrators through coordination with local law enforcement, national governments, the UN, and other relevant institutions. Our partnership will call on member states, the UN, and its agencies to adhere to their stated commitments to fully incorporate the language and goals, and especially of SDG Target 5.2 in the political declarations member states will adopt in September of 2017. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, in particular for highlighting this new initiative. So the question is always how to connect with the already existing ones. And now it's my pleasure to invite the distinguished representative of Brazil. So you have the floor.
Hello. Thank you for giving me the floor. I'll be very brief in order to allow for more interventions on the floor for civil society and to enrich our discussions. But one point that I would like to highlight in considering that this hearing is supposed to gather important inputs for both the political declaration that will be negotiated in connection with the preparation for the high-level meeting, and for the high-level meeting itself and the appraisal of the global plan against trafficking. That is the cross-cutting nature of the trafficking phenomena. And that is proved by the fact that it is reflected in, as mentioned by several delegations and the panelists themselves, in 3 different goals of 3 different areas and 3 different targets, specific targets of the 2030 agenda. And for Brazil, this is also a reflection on how we should address the question. We should address that with this exactly cross-cutting nature and cross-cutting view. And considering that the human trafficking has several forms of manifestation, several forms of being conducted and being affected in different regions of the world. When we see all the reports put together by the UNODC in the last few years, we'll see that the different situations around the world call for different action and different approaches. And it's very interdisciplinary. We have to work with the broadest possible view in order not to prioritize or highlight only one type of trafficking, only one trend of trafficking. all of all of trafficking, all of the forms and manifestation of human trafficking must be equally and hardly fought, and in every day and in every way we can. So what we call for in this upcoming negotiations and during the meeting itself, during the high-level meeting itself, is that we can devote attention to all of the aspects of the problem, not highlighting only or cherry-picking only one aspect. As important as it may seem, we only gonna achieve a sustainable and effective result if we can tackle all of the aspects that this scourge of trafficking presents to us. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, the distinguished representative of Brazil, for highlighting the need for a holistic approach on trafficking. It's my pleasure now to invite the distinguished representative of Italy. Madame, you have the floor. No, sir, have the floor, sorry.
Yeah, I wish to thank all panelists of today for their important contribution, but now I would like to take advantage of the presence of Ms. Rivard and Ms. Gupta for a question. It's particularly important to me, I think to us, in view of the political declaration, the debate. I would very much like to have your answer about one question. What kind of difficulties and problems you faced in the moment you were approaching public services, civil servants, in order to have their support? If I well understood from your previous speeches, something was working, but something was not working very well. So it should be important for us in the future step to be a little bit more aware about the problem you face, the difficulties you have, and this could be very useful for us to have better languages and better work on us. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for this question posed to the Mrs. Gupta. It's my pleasure now to invite the distinguished representative of Zambia to take the floor. Okay, excellent. So I think we have exhausted the list of speakers. Now I would like to turn back to the panelists to respond, to comment on the questions that were raised, on the comments that were made. So let's start with actually Mrs. Gupta. So Madame, you can interview.
Thank you. I'll answer the last question first, that what are the difficulties we face when trying to tackle sex trafficking, when we try to get services for victims and survivors of trafficking, and also when we approach civil servants. One of the big difficulties we face is that very often civil servants see it only as a public health issue, and all they want to do is go into red light districts and distribute condoms because they see the whole issue from the point of view of the male buyer rather than from the point of view of the girl who's bought or sold. And so services that they create and policymakers that they which are created are actually very often on behalf of the male buyer rather than for a girl who needs to go to school, a girl who needs to be in a place other than a red light district or in a brothel, a girl who needs protection should she escape from a brothel, that someone should take her back and not tell her this is her destiny and nothing can be done for her. So everything has to be thought of from the point of view of the last girl, and it's very hard to make civil servants make that shift. And this is possibly also being driven by agendas which are larger, by certain public health foundations or big foundations who are funding condom distribution programs all over the world to reduce AIDS without making them gender sensitive and without making them sensitive to the needs of the most vulnerable, that they need their basic needs to be addressed first, food, clothing, and shelter, and legal protection before they get a condom or simultaneously get a condom. So we have to think about that. The other challenge that we face is resources and funds. And, as you heard today, the UN Trafficking Fund for Survivors itself is there's so little money, $2.6 million, when there are millions of people who are victims of trafficking. It's less than $1 per person who's in data today, who exist in data. So we just need much more money to be able to do what we do. We need to be able to shift the blame from the victim to the perpetrator, to decriminalize women in prostitution, and to start punishing the pimps and the johns who are using and abusing the women.
Thank you very much, Mrs. Gupta. I would now like to invite Mrs. Hevert for comments.
Yes, thank you, Ms. Gupta. I couldn't agree more. And we, as part of our trainings at airports around the world, incorporate the voice of a survivor. Not only do we give them a platform to speak, but their testimony opens the hearts and makes our training come home in every case. So it's so powerful. What we need from you is assistance in pressuring the private sector to support these larger social goals. We have not had any airline, not one airline, support us except for with miles. We have had them give us miles, but we did our first 20 trainings for free, and we need to provide a stipend for our survivors. We didn't have any funding. We did, and then I realized I was taking airline ambassadors down. So we tried to raise about $3,000. That's nothing for a domestic training, and it's our members that are collecting money at bake sales, or a Rotary Club or a church that has funded us so far. We need the governments of the world and the businesses of the world to get behind this effort, because it's such a simple solution. We have 28 trained professionals ready to go to any country of the world and provide training for every major airline. That will cost nothing but their expenses. So we need support in that, and we ask for your assistance.
Thank you so much, Mrs. Rivert. So now, Mrs. Bao, you have the floor.
Thank you. Well, there was a question about obstacles that we face when it comes to trafficking in persons. And the main issue will always be funding. As we heard from the representative from Africa, all countries agree. And we establish norms, regulations through organizations, multinational ones, which tell us what to do. And then we turn this into national laws to say how we should do this. But in the end, the difficult part is to receive funding in order to implement this, not just on behalf of governments or states, but receiving support from the private sector. And when a law is drawn up, for example, in my country, based on our experience, when the law is enacted, we clarify what the source of funding will be, and that helps us very much to tackle all these modalities, including the scourge of trafficking in persons. This is a good practice, clarifying this in the law, and I think that this can help other countries to face these obstacles. as countering the trafficking in persons helps us to address the 4 Ps under the agenda, which is under this global agenda. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Minister Yao. I just wanted to highlight a few things that I think are quite important that were raised during this dialogue. The first thing is it's difficult to find a team that has more consensus and more acknowledgement than the trafficking issue. I think if you look at the recent resolution of Security Council, Human Rights Council, we got the SDGs, we got a Pope. So everybody's talking about trafficking, and as the representative of civil society highlighted this afternoon, the situation seems to get worse. So there's a lot of political commitment, a lot of words, a lot of, but not too much funding, not too much action. So why is this happening? And what can we do, to change the situation? I think one element that is very important, thank you so much, Nancy, for highlighting this, is the role of the private sector. Basically, not only the private sector, companies, business, but also the consumers. So the consumers should be able to push for the products and the private sectors, for the airlines and other elements to ensure that action is taken. I think another element that was put on the table by some of the colleagues was the issue that this is not only actually a responsibility of the state or the business, but it's a kind of everyone's job. So the same, if you see something, say something that applies to other arenas, should also apply to trafficking. So I think this is something that can be, we need more education, more awareness raising on this topic. One element that I think is quite fundamental is the holistic approach. So we're not talking about just looking at one specific target, 5.2 or 8.7, and just targeting the specific element, but looking at structural policies. That actually, that's the nature of the 2030 agenda. So the situation is getting worse. One can imagine that perhaps because the refugee crisis is booming. So we can't really tackle the trafficking issue without addressing the refugee crisis and addressing migration policies. So there's a clear connection between elements. So these are some of the things that I heard here that are quite impressive, and I think could be a useful contribution to the outcome document. Understand, Mrs. Hival would like to make another point. Please, Madam, you have the floor.
I want to make one more point. We've provided trainings in 8 countries. Each country has their own hotline, or several, sometimes 3 or 4 hotlines. There's no international coordination of data. Data sharing is siloed in individual receptacles, and we need coordination with government, law enforcement, and data sharing with NGOs. When we went to ask how effective our trainings have been at all these different airports where we've been giving out the DHS number, for example, they were unable to give us any feedback back, no sharing of information. That's not partnership. We can do better than that. That's the point.
Yeah, that's precisely my last point. So in the era of the information, the big data, that you can basically know exactly what one person wants to buy and in a particular moment, in a particular place, why can't we use all this information, all these capacities to address trafficking? So this is something that these are questions that are still to be answered. So if there are no more requests, I think we can conclude this panel. Thank you so much to the speakers and to the participants for your very meaningful interventions. And we'll be, of course, summarizing everything that you said that will be convened to as an input to the discussions about the revision of the global plan and the high-level plan. Thank you so much.